First responders, they're doing everything they can to make things better. Here's the problem. They're the only ones, okay? Now, I'm not talking about people who are reaching out in their communities and trying to help in a moment of crisis. In the worst of times, the best of people always come out. And we're seeing that. But we're seeing something else also. The fires are a horrible reality for the families involved and for the whole state of California, but they should also be a wake-up call for all of us, because everything happening there is a metaphor for a national crisis. For example, the absurdly early and irrational blame game that started almost exclusively on social media, when the fires were at their worst. Even now, the question, were they preventable, is being asked in the midst of it, and it's always a loaded suggestion that ends up in blaming a political opponent. I saw a lawmaker on cable blaming the other party, and on the bottom of the screen it said, "Extreme winds returning, Santa Ana changing the game." And you're just going to talk about how the only thing that matters is what party's in power. Why? We know why. We are addicted to blame and have little taste for solutions. It's easier for the media, it's easier for the two parties, and let's be honest, it's easier for all of us to be baited into outrage on social media. Where are the ideas for how to change the infrastructure? No, Proposition 1, everybody keeps talking about it, right? We're all learning California history in a moment. Proposition 1 passed 20 years ago. A lot of delayed water projects. Oh, well, there's your blame. No, they wouldn't have removed the risk of these fires in Southern California. They weren't even connected to the LA water system. So why do we keep hearing about it? Empty blame. Have you noticed that none of the loudest voices have offered any fixes other than to blame their opposition? And we see it repeatedly. And no, not just in California and not just from Trump. We hear it from Trump, but not just Trump. What problem can you think of at a national level that is a debate over potential fixes? The border, the debt, crime, prices, just like the fires and the insurance lapse, and I have some new insight on that for you in a moment. It's all about blame. It's never about solutions, and we know why. Our politics is all about which of the two parties is worse, and we're all playing into it all the time in every instance, and now that's playing out in California. Fires tearing through Southern California. It's not enough to suppress the push for advantage. I was surprised how early it started, but I shouldn't have been. That's what the hype about the water shortage is about, right? You know that, right? You haven't heard any firefighters saying, "We don't have any water, the pumps are empty." Well, then why do you hear that all over social media? Empty reservoirs, no water in the pumps. And we all know the facts. It wasn't a water inventory issue, it was a water pressure issue. Oh, it's semantics. No, it isn't. Why? Because the infrastructure of Pacific Palisades, which has a lot of incline, right? And elsewhere, was overwhelmed by the fires and the needs. They hadn't anticipated it. Should they have? Legitimate question. But experts, I haven't heard one yet, say anything but no water system in the world could have stopped these wildfires. And yes, one reservoir in Pacific Palisades had been closed a year earlier for maintenance. It was supposed to end next month. No one fighting the fires say they were that reservoir away from bad pressure or for anything. Could it have contributed? Sure. But for that to be labeled as, here's why, it's about nothing but blame and gotchas. Perfect example of the difference between the shite show that I'm describing and reality is when the king of Twitter actually talked to actual firefighters. Watch this.
It was water availability. I understand that was not an issue in Malibu. Is that correct?
There was water. We have several reservoirs that encinos that we use a lot. Now, just an example, if we have one building burning, we could flow 1,000 gallons a minute on that one building with the hose lays that we put in to stop it. You can imagine 1,000 gallons per house we couldn't do, right?
Correct me if I'm wrong. In Malibu, along the coast, there was no shortage of water. In the Palisades, there was a shortage of water at a certain point. Or is that not accurate?
Well, we were flowing just an amount of water that the system couldn't overbear. We're just overbearing, just because of how much water these firefighters were utilizing.
Okay. All right.
Okay, all right. I am an Elon fan. This is not a gotcha, okay? I think he's an incredible force. I really do. But how come he didn't say, stop saying water was the issue? Why not? You notice his tone? Oh, okay, thank you. Oh, well, correct me if I'm wrong. He's nothing like that on Twitter. That's not encouraged on Twitter. Why? I'll tell you why. Because he's standing face to face with somebody. That's why. That's why you're not going to hear him say, well, that's a lie. Trump told me, or I heard. Not with those guys. Not staring you in the face. You're not going to say anything but what he said. Deferential, asking questions, open to being wrong. And he was wrong. And again, I'm not blaming him. All right? He's part of what we're going to need as a solution in our society. Another issue playing out in California that we deal with more and more is the preference for who we care about. For all the yap online about being anti-elite, coverage has been overweighted with celebrities. And we've heard more about pets than the people worst affected. And yeah, I care about pets, and they need help. But you don't think it's a little weird that you know more about horses than you do about the poorest people who've been completely wiped out in places like Altadena? Tonight, you're going to hear from people there. And yeah, they lost the house. But unlike many who've been featured, they have nothing else. There's no second house. There's no money in the bank to rebuild. There's no insurance. And again, it's not just here. Think if it was all celebrities in North Carolina, you think they'd still be freezing their asses off in shelters down there right now? If that train dumped chemicals in Hollywood instead of East Palestine, you think people there would still be afraid to touch their water? And then we get to the heart of the matter. Why did this happen? You can bet that when they start getting into that part of the investigation, it's already happening, but when they get into it in earnest, the theories are going to so coincidentally favor people's politics. Who's an illegal? Who had a red hat on? Who is a whatever agenda they want to promote. And most likely, what's the truth going to be? It's going to be a mix of climate, accidental, inaction, and arson. Land management is blamed, but based on what? Budget cuts are in play. Yeah, but is there really a deficiency of what was needed? Now that takes us into what? The big insurance question. Insurers dropped policies in Southern California this past year because of changes in land management. They knew it was too dangerous. So did the government. Why didn't they do anything? That's not true. They didn't just pull policies because Democrats stopped managing the land. That's a gotcha for Twitter, where there's no interest in a solution. And it's not because they simply shifted money in California to illegals and homeless druggies. Those are real issues. But that doesn't mean that it's the explanation for this. It's a stilted notion. That's why nothing gets better. Because they just get power and they get to keep it by just showing you what would be worse. The real answer is what we want least these days in politics. It's complicated. Whether they were started by power lines, lightning, climate change, accident, arson, combination, we have a situation that has been allowed to get worse instead of making the hard choices to make it better. Here's the villain: the inability to do anything about what doesn't suit the immediate need. Yeah, you can blame the insurers. That's easy. But the problem's way bigger than them. Everyone involved knows it. This situation has been left alone to languish in California and in many other places. We're dealing with the same thing in Florida. We're dealing with the same thing in Tornado Alley. Why? Because we have allowed a risk situation to get managed year by year when they know they can't do that in any cost-effective way. I know it's unsatisfying, but it's true. You can't blame the decision to drop policies in the same year just on greed. These insurance companies aren't treated like health insurance companies, by the way. The state specifically, especially in California, controls how much they can increase rates. Did you know that? Since the late 80s, they've controlled the rate of increase. Why? To keep the rates down. But what happened as a result? Well, the companies wound up taking on risk that they couldn't really afford with the margins they wanted. People were able to build in places that were artificially price supported So they were less expensive to insure than they should have been, and people built more expensive homes there than they probably would have if they knew the real risk. And some say that this imbalance also helped create a casual perspective on fire prevention from the state on down. That's why a lot of people didn't put the fireproof roofs and all the other things, the mitigation things they could have done. The insurers weren't demanding it. And then what happens? Over time, home values go up. Replacement cost goes up. The company's ability to make money goes down to the point where they'd rather get out of the market. Now, you can debate how much profit is enough. I don't think that debate's going anywhere in America. But again, Florida, the Carolinas, Tornado Alley, you can't do it this way anymore. This is why the insurers are dropping people and spiking prices all over the country. Okay? You can't manage risk like this. We have a model for how to do this. You know where it took place? Housing. 1938, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were created by the federal government. Two different mortgage companies to help liquidity in the system and to deal with a big period of time and risk. That's what has to happen here. Insurers can't do this year over year anymore. It's not going to work. It's going to be too expensive in some places, not available in others, and they know it. And here's how they know it. Way back in the 60s, the state of California started this, what's the program called? The FAIR program, okay? For people to get access to insurance when they can't get it anywhere else. It was never really funded. People don't really know about it. And when all these policies got dropped in Southern California, it's not like the state was right there hand in hand stepping in to put these people in other policies. That certainly wasn't true in the poorest areas. Why? Because we're not about solutions. We're about blame. So they had a stopgap in place. They have the FAIR plan. They have an emergency fund, but it's not really funded. And it's not reinsured. I know it's too complicated, but it's not dealt with in the way that you would in terms of its solvency and its ability if you were really looking at the risk in this situation. Now, do you want to blame Gavin Newsom? Yeah, fine. It's been around since 1968. The last 10 governors, 5 are Republican, 5 are Democrat. Look, all the parties do is go like this. Nobody wants to go like this. Nobody wants to go like this. Because we're not in a solutions business. We don't reward them, right? You're not hearing a lot of people say that the state stepped right in to help. Why? Where's the win in that? So look, it's easy to blame the people in charge in California right now, and there's certainly blame to go around. But I'm just saying that's not going to make it any better, okay? And that's why California is a metaphor of who we care about, of what we care about, and of whether we choose blame over solutions. And remember, we only do this in our politics. You don't do it anywhere else in your life, where you would deal with a crisis by just sitting around and saying whose fault it is and not be desperate to find a way to a better place. The debt, prices, Social Security, Medicare, our election system, they're all long-term problems that people go like this about all the time, and they don't make it better. The question is, when will we decide that we will not reward on the basis simply of who is worse anymore? When will we decide that we demand something better, and not just in a campaign slogan, but in the actions of that person or that party? That's what I want to know. Hey, thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your screen. And don't forget, click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.